which leads me
Yeah.
into an announcement that was kind of made today. I know it's not exactly official yet. I don't think that USA Soccer has announced it themselves, but there was the talk that the Development Academy was no longer. So I kind of want to chat with you about that and get your thoughts. If you have any about that, if you've heard of it, what do you make of that announcement?
Yeah, certainly. I don't think it was necessarily a surprise to some. I mean, if you followed the Development Academy very closely, there for the last couple of years, there's been a growing divide between the Major League Soccer clubs that are involved in the DA and then the non-MLS clubs, and as a result, there's been talk of the MLS clubs just pulling out entirely and starting their own league, which I think each and every year it was getting closer and closer for that to happen. And so there was certainly starting to be some division. And I think as a result of the COVID-19 stuff, I mean, it was kind of a opportunity, I think, for U.S. Soccer to say, let's kind of hit a reset button. Let's kind of shut this thing down and allow Major League Soccer to kind of go about their development path in a different way and try to allow some of these other entities that are in the youth soccer umbrella to kind of figure out how it all works. I think it's bittersweet because U.S. Soccer at the beginning, I think, had this grand idea of capturing all of the best players and putting them into kind of a unified environment under similar types of standards, and it's just been very hard. The United States is a really unique soccer market, and there's never been unity in terms of where kids were going to be playing, and as a result, it's always been fractured. And if this change results in less fracture, then it certainly can be a positive thing. But time certainly will tell on that side.
Yeah, absolutely. So if it's not really a shock to that many people, do you think there are things in place, like clubs are already prepared for that? Do you think kids really do? I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen to them now.
Yeah. Well, I guess for me, it wasn't a shock just because you hear different rumblings along the recruiting when you're on the recruiting side, and things that may or may not happen. But having said that, it is a big change, and there's going to be a lot of clubs now that are trying to scramble to figure out, what are the best environments for their players? What does that look like? And, players now are trying to figure out, what club makes the most sense for me from my development standpoint, and where they want to go. Hopefully with the timing of this, if there has been a benefit to all this going on, U.S. Soccer is kind of ripping the Band-Aid off now, as opposed to in July, which would make, clubs trying to figure out where they go and families and kids trying to figure out where they go a little bit more challenging if it was that time. So in some ways, timing here was good, but it's certainly a change. With any big change, there's going to be a lot of moving parts, and I don't think it's going to be an easy one for club directors to navigate. But I already saw just this afternoon six former Development Academy clubs in California just joined the ECNL, so certainly that'll be a landing spot for some, and then some will probably go back to USYS Soccer, which offers National League and some other different options. So there's going to be a landing spot for everybody. It's just going to take a little while for clubs and players to figure out what's best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a good perspective to kind of keep it on the positive side. Everyone is kind of out right now. So canceling it now, I guess, isn't terrible in the fact that, you're not worried about going to practice tomorrow and no longer having a team since everyone's off the pitch anyway. So that's a good way to look at it for sure. Now, how do you think that will affect recruiting? Because I know those DA events were big recruiting events for college coaches such as yourself. So do you have any thoughts on how that might affect recruiting?
So what I envision happening is all of these clubs are pretty established clubs with big infrastructures on the Development Academy side. They're either going to go to ECNL on the boys side, or go back into, the USYS system, which offers National League and some regional leagues. And unfortunately, I mean, I hope this doesn't happen, but the way youth soccer is monetized, I mean, there could be just somebody popping in to create their own organization to capture some of these clubs. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope we see less, not more competition. And if we do see less, then I think it's just going to be some better teams and good players are going to some of the events that a lot of college coaches are already attending, with, things like the Disney event and ECNL showcases and National League showcases and tournaments like Jefferson Cup and Surf Cup and all, tournaments that have been established for quite a long time. I just think there's going to be an influx of good teams and good players. And if that raises the standard and the level of those events, then that makes good events even better. So certainly a positive on that side.
Yeah. So now you mentioned not having more, I guess, competition in that field. If the MLS is doing their own thing, do you think some of those kids will kind of roll over into that, or it just kind of depends on what they roll out?
Yeah, well, certainly this is just me talking here. So my preference would be to see less competition. I mean, the youth soccer landscape is fractured as already, and I would hate to see it continue to be fractured. Having said that, the MLS clubs are kind of its own entity. And so if there's a player that's living in a Major League Soccer market, so, certainly any of the big markets in the United States, Chicago, New York, Philly, Boston, etc., then in theory, those clubs are attracting kind of the best of the best in terms of ability, but also in terms of what the players want to get out of that experience from their development and their aspirations. I mean, all the players in theory that are going to those club opportunities with Major League Soccer franchises are players that want to pursue professional opportunities. And that's not for everybody, but it is for some. And to have that opportunity for players, I think is incredible in our country. I mean, certainly when I was a youth player, we didn't have any of that growing up, and there wasn't a clear pathway of how to get to the professional ranks. And so not only is that being offered by those Major League Soccer franchises, it's also offered pretty much cost-free. So there's opportunity for every player from every socioeconomic background. And, certainly the challenge is trying to get into those markets. And, so there's some complexity there, but I also think those franchises are also working through some of those things with opening up what they would call homegrown territories and, a whole bunch of nitty gritty that some of the executives kick around, but yeah, it's kind of its own separate arm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know, I guess, even though everything is still kind of up in the air, it's kind of good to hear some different perspectives. Now I know your community, any sport really, is very tight knit. Have you heard anything from other coaches about, what is going on with all of this? Any kind of other insight maybe?
Yeah, I think there was the initial, whoa, this is actually going to happen, that was passed around among our coaching friends. I mean, certainly the Division III coaches, I mean, there was a couple of us that had an initial gut reaction of like, oh man, maybe some of the kids that fall through the cracks because some of the bigger programs in Division I almost exclusively recruit, or not exclusively, but certainly a lot of their recruiting was at the development academy events that oftentimes there'd be some kids that might fall through the cracks as a result and would be at an ECNL event or a National League event that smaller programs or a Division II or III program might be able to kind of get on. That maybe that gets a little bit harder, but honestly, if you're a good player, you're going to get found in any environment. So it's going to be interesting. I think all of us as coaches are just kind of taking a wait and see approach, and there's obviously a big wait and see approach on quite a lot of fronts right now with not only youth sport but higher education. So it's gonna be an interesting 6 to 12 months, and and the soccer changes will just be a small part of what's going to be happening in our country over the next year or so.
Yeah.